The first time the house called me, I thought it was a prank. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it because the number was blocked. When I finally picked up, all I heard was static and a faint, distorted breathing. Then a voice whispered my name. Ethan. I sat straight up in bed. Who is this? The line went dead. I checked my call log. There was no record of the call. I told myself it had been a wrong number or some kind of glitch. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been listening to me. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same blocked number. This time the voice said, "You left me." I hung up, my hands shaking. I had no idea what it meant, but something about it felt personal, like the voice knew me. Over the next week, the calls kept coming, always after midnight, always from a blocked number. Sometimes the voice whispered, sometimes it cried, sometimes it screamed. "You promised you'd come back. Why did you leave me? I'm still here." I started sleeping with my phone turned off. That's when the letters started arriving. The envelopes were old and yellowed, like they'd been sitting somewhere for decades. There was no return address, only my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside each one was the same message: "Come home." I had no idea what home it was talking about, until I saw the address. It was a small town about 3 hours away, a place I had never been to, or at least, I thought I hadn't. Something about the address made my chest feel tight, like I was remembering something I wasn't supposed to. I finally gave in and drove there. The town was quiet, too quiet. The kind of place where every building looks abandoned, even if people still live there. The address led me to an old house at the end of a dead-end road. The paint was peeling. The windows were dark. The front door was slightly open. I hadn't even stepped inside yet, and I already felt like I was being watched. The moment I crossed the threshold, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered. "You came back," the voice said. The air inside the house was cold and stale. Dust covered everything. It looked like no one had lived there in years. But I could hear footsteps. Slow, careful, moving somewhere above me. I followed the sound up the stairs. Every step creaked like it was about to collapse. At the end of the hallway was a single door. My phone buzzed again. "You're almost home." I opened the door. Inside was a child's bedroom. Toys sat on the floor. A small bed was pushed against the wall, and on the dresser, a framed photo. It was of me, but I was younger, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in front of this house. I dropped the frame. Memories started flooding back. My parents had brought me here once, a long time ago. They had told me it was just a vacation, but it wasn't. They had left me here. The voice called my phone again. "You weren't supposed to leave." I ran back downstairs, my heart pounding. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the living room. It looked like me. Same face, same height, but its eyes were dark and hollow. "You took my life," it said, "so I took yours." I realized the truth then. I had never been meant to leave this house. Whatever that thing was, it had. I ran out the front door and didn't stop until I reached my car. The house was silent behind me, but my phone rang one last time. "You can't escape home." Even now, years later, I still get those calls. And every time I do, I swear I can smell that old house waiting for me to come back.
The old camera was already in the house when we moved in. It sat on a tall tripod in the corner of the living room, aimed directly at the couch. The lens was covered by a sliding plastic cap, and a small red light blinked faintly on its side. I assumed it belonged to the previous owner. My wife, Laura, didn't like it. "Why would anyone leave that behind?" she asked the first night. "It's creepy." "I'll get rid of it later," I said. "It's probably broken." But I never touched it. Every time I walked past it, I felt a strange pressure, like someone was staring straight through me. A few days later, the first strange thing happened. I was home alone when I heard a soft clicking noise coming from the living room. When I went to check, the red light on the camera was glowing steadily instead of blinking. The lens cap was open. The camera was recording. I hadn't turned it on. I slid the cap shut and unplugged it from the wall. The red light went dark. That night, Laura and I were watching TV when she suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" Someone whispered. I didn't hear anything, but the camera's red light had turned back on. I walked over and pulled the plug again. The next morning, we found a USB drive on the floor beneath the camera. We didn't own a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. There was one video file. It was labeled with yesterday's date. When I clicked play, I felt my stomach drop. The footage showed Laura and me sitting on the couch watching TV. The angle was from the camera in the corner. We watched ourselves talk, laugh, and move around the room. The timestamp was from the night before. Neither of us had known we were being recorded. At the end of the video, something happened that made my blood run cold. After Laura and I went to bed, the camera kept recording. The living room stayed empty for several minutes. Then, something moved. A dark shape emerged from the hallway. It was tall and thin, and its movements were slow and jerky, like it wasn't used to walking. It stood in front of the camera, and it smiled. The next day, we tried to throw the camera away. No matter where we put it, it kept reappearing in the living room. We locked it in the garage. The next morning, it was back in its corner. The USB drive returned too. This time, it held another video. It showed us sleeping in our bedroom. From inside the room, Laura started crying. "We're not alone here," she whispered. That night, we slept with the lights on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a soft whirring noise. The camera was in our bedroom. Its red light was on, pointed directly at us. We ran out of the house and didn't come back until morning. When we returned, the front door was locked. Everything was normal, except the camera was back in the living room, and a new USB drive was waiting. We never watched that video. We moved out 2 days later. But sometimes, late at night, I still see a small red light reflecting off the walls of our new home. Watching, recording, waiting.
The first thing I noticed about the house was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind that lets you relax. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like something is listening. My wife and I had just bought the place. It was an old 2-story house on the edge of a small town, surrounded by trees and cracked sidewalks. The price was suspiciously low, but we didn't ask too many questions. We were young, broke, and desperate to move somewhere we could start over. The previous owners had left in a hurry. Most of their furniture was gone, but there were still strange things scattered around. Old shoes in the closet, dusty photo frames in drawers,
and a child's crayon drawings taped inside one of the cabinets. The drawings showed stick figure people standing inside a house, but they weren't standing on the floors. They were drawn inside the walls. I laughed it off at the time. Just a kid's imagination. The first night in the house, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was faint, almost like a mouse. I listened closely. The noise was coming from inside the walls. Probably rats, I told myself. But rats don't sound like fingers dragging across wood. The scratching moved slowly, sliding from one side of the bedroom to the other. And then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard breathing. Soft, right behind the wall next to my bed. I didn't wake my wife. I just lay there, frozen, staring at the dark ceiling. The next morning, I tried to find where the sound had come from. There were no holes, no cracks, nothing. Over the next few days, it kept happening. Scratching, breathing, sometimes whispering. But it was always too faint to understand. My wife started hearing it too. "There's something wrong with this house," she said. We called an exterminator. He checked the walls, the attic, and the crawl space. "No animals," he said. "Not even droppings." That should have been a relief. It wasn't. One night, I was alone in the living room when I heard something knock from inside the wall behind the couch. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps. I stood up. "Hello?" I said. Knock, knock. The knocking moved. It traveled along the wall, following me. I ran to the kitchen. The knocking followed. By the time I reached the hallway, it was coming from every direction, like something was crawling through the walls, surrounding me. I locked myself in the bathroom until it stopped. The next morning, we found handprints. They were pressed into the wallpaper from the inside. You could see the outlines of fingers pushing outward. That was when my wife wanted to leave, but we couldn't. We had no money, no place to go, and no one would believe us. So we stayed. The voices started after that. At first, they were just murmurs, like people talking in another room. But soon, they became clearer. They whispered our names. They begged, "Let us out. We're cold. There's no light." One night, my wife woke me up shaking. "They're crying," she said. And she was right. From inside the walls, we could hear sobbing, dozens of voices, all around the house. I tried tearing a hole in the drywall. The moment my hammer hit the wall, something screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman scream. I dropped the hammer and backed away. Blood started leaking from the crack. We finally called the police. They searched the house. They found nothing. But when they were leaving, one of them asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Who's the little girl upstairs?" "We don't have a child." That night, the walls began to bulge, like something inside was pressing against them. We heard voices screaming, "We're coming out!" Plaster cracked, wood splintered, hands pushed through, faces appeared, pale, stretched, twisted. Dozens of people crawled out of the walls. They looked starved, hollow-eyed, not quite human anymore. They stood around us. One of them smiled. "Your turn," it said. The next thing I remember is waking up in the living room alone. The house was quiet. My wife was gone. So were the voices. But sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching again, from inside the walls, waiting for me to join them.
When I first moved into the duplex on Willow Street, everyone told me how lucky I was. The rent was absurdly cheap for the area. The place had been renovated recently. New paint, new floors, even new windows. From the outside, it looked like any normal suburban rental. Two narrow houses connected by a shared wall, each with its own front door and tiny yard. The only strange thing was that the other half of the duplex was empty. The landlord, a nervous man named Mr. Hargreave, told me the previous tenant had moved out suddenly and that he hadn't had time to rent it yet. "You won't even hear them when I do," he said, forcing a smile. "The walls are thick." That turned out to be a lie. The first night I spent there, I woke up to the sound of someone coughing on the other side of the wall. It was a wet, choking cough, the kind that sounds like lungs filled with fluid. It went on for almost a full minute before stopping. I assumed maybe someone had moved in without my knowing. The next day I saw Mr. Hargreave in the driveway and asked him about it. "Oh," he said quickly, "no one lives there yet." "But I heard coughing," I said, "like someone was sick." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed nervously. "Old pipes," he said. "They make strange noises." That night I heard footsteps. Slow, careful steps moving back and forth on the other side of the shared wall. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Someone was whispering. I couldn't understand the words at first, but I could hear the tone. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was patient, like someone quietly talking to themselves. I knocked on the wall. "Hello?" I said. The whispering stopped. Then something knocked back. 3 slow taps. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few days, I kept hearing the neighbor, coughing, whispering, sometimes laughing softly. But every time I asked the landlord, he insisted the other side was empty. I finally went around to the front door of the other unit. The windows were dark. Dust coated the glass. The mailbox was stuffed with unopened mail. No one had lived there in a long time. So who was I hearing? One night, I woke up to the sound of someone calling my name. "Mark." It was coming from inside the wall. "Mark, I know you're there." I sat up in bed, frozen. "I can hear you breathing," the voice said, "just like you can hear me." I pressed my ear against the wall. I could hear him breathing, right there. "I've been so lonely," he whispered. "They boarded me in, you know." "What?" I asked before I could stop myself. "They didn't want me anymore," he said, "so they sealed the house. But I'm still here." I backed away from the wall. "That's not possible," I said. He laughed. "You think this wall is thick?" he said. "It's just paint and wood." The next morning I noticed something new. Cracks had formed in the wall between our units, thin lines running from floor to ceiling, and in one spot, the paint was peeling outward, like something had been pushing on it from the other side. That night the whispering turned into crying, deep, broken sobs coming through the wall. "I can't get out," he said, "but you can help me." I tried to ignore him. I wore headphones. I left the TV on, but I could still hear him, always whispering, always calling my name. One night, I heard scratching, the sound of fingernails scraping against wood. It was coming from the wall behind my couch. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. When I pulled the couch away, I saw a small hole in the wall. Something dark was inside. I leaned closer. An eye opened in the hole. It was bloodshot and wild. "That's better," the neighbor whispered. "Now I can see you." I called the police. They searched the other unit. They found nothing. No furniture, no food, no signs anyone had ever lived there recently. But in the basement, behind a false wall, they found something else. A sealed-off room.
Inside it were bones, dozens of them, human. The landlord disappeared after that, but the whispering didn't stop. Even now, in my new apartment miles away, I sometimes hear tapping on my walls. 3 slow knocks, and a familiar voice whispering, "I'm still here."